that road which goes down to the center of your campus is going to be, thank you, is going to be doubled. I mean, it's more than doubled. It becomes a huge thing down the center of your campus, breaking it up into two zones. Now, this is the bypass, the LKS bypass, which is possible for us still to do because the contractor who has got the contract hasn't yet reached this point. So if the CM agrees, it can be moved. But of course, it will take clearance from the CM. Now, that will give you a campus of 117 hectares, completely your own. Other things will follow from here. One is that this road would act as a kind of barrier for stopping encroachments. Right now, your road goes to the middle, so encroachments easily come in from the edges. Then the other thing, of course, the road down the middle would take a lot of land, but it would also, here we go, down the center is 1926 4.3 hectares, and on the edge is 4.8. It's almost the same, and there's a common stretch of 1.3 hectares. But actually, the land you lose will be more than this because you have setbacks on either side of your road if it went through the middle of your campus. So, and then here's the road with us. It's a very good road. It's got wide sidewalks on either side, bicycle tracks. So it's very well suited to a university, what LKS has proposed. So I think this is one matter which is really worth, and I only hope that we get the CM's attention, that he gives you the go-ahead. I think unofficially he was in favor of this. It was just the pressure of that big sporting event that stopped him from pushing it through. Now we go on to the campus. If you look at Goa and the plateaus, they're very barren. It's only as you get down to the water level that you can begin to get lush vegetation. And that's where people live. That red spot would show a typical Goan village down there. You have it right next to Sidad. Now, under this hot sun, it's very difficult, extremely difficult, and that's your first basic problem. You're building a place which is really quite hostile. And the buildings themselves have to be designed to give you the shade you want and to give you the connections. Because basically, a campus, a university, is a pedestrian town. If you look at any of them, Oxford, Cambridge, any American campus, it's a town of pedestrians. And they are well protected, and their places are defined. Unfortunately here, your second problem is that your buildings are all just scattered. And they don't seem to relate to each other in a way which usually happens on a campus, and I'll explain why. So, you know where we are right now, and you can see that there's something called yin-yang, you know. If I look at the building, and then I look at the space it leaves behind, both are equally important. You put down a building, and the space between buildings is as important as the shape of the building. I think musicians often say, well, you know, Carlos, that the notes are very important, and the spaces, the silences between notes are as important. In architecture, it's everything. And that's symbolized beautifully by yin-yang of the Chinese, where it says, this will be black, that's white, this will be built form, this will be open space. It's very, very important. But what we actually get is unfortunately, an almost meaningless spaces which can't really be used except to try and scurry across in the hot sun. So this is how we get a result like this. There is nothing created between buildings. That would have to be rectified. Buildings are always further away than you want them to be. There are places to sit, but again, very hostile in that environment. Now, who suffers because of this are first of all the students, and then I assume the faculty or any visitors. because to travel across is very tough, and that should be rectified. I'll show you. For instance, here I thought this was a nice picture where you see the students and the people here, some of them are harder than the shadows for the shade. And that's quite sad. The shade should be more generous than that. That's another thing you'll have to rectify. And then, of course, some of the buildings are falling down, which means, I don't know if that's bad news or good news, you decide. But it's like you do have an opportunity for rethinking things. Now let me show you places which have to deal with very hostile climates, but of another kind perhaps. Here is Cambridge. Very, very hostile winters. But look at it, talk about yin yang. Look at the way the buildings are. You tell me which is more important, the green courtyards or the buildings. Each create the other. That's a perfect yin yang. That is what architecture is. It's not a question of making a shape of a building and putting it there and another one here. It's how they work together, like in music. And these work stunningly together. In fact, you could say people go to Oxford or Cambridge or wherever, and they describe this as Gothic and that is Tudor. As far as I'm concerned, it's like one big piece of cheese, and you just cut portions out. It doesn't matter whether they were made of stone or glass. The system is bigger, and the system is about protecting. Look at the zones created for the students from the different colleges. So they have an identity. They're not stumbling around in the heat or in the cold. Cambridge is terribly cold because it's flat and the winds come right from Siberia, well, from Russia. And there are no mountains in between. So these walls are very, very practical. In fact, these are the archetype for the great universities of Europe, the Sorbonne and Oxford and Cambridge and Heidelberg. Strangely enough, come from the Middle East. They come from Iraq. This is one of the most famous madrasas, and of course from Syria. And in these madrasas, built again in a hostile climate, you can see how a courtyard has been created, and these madrasas, the students and the teachers live together, and these are the ideas that that became Oxford and Cambridge. And you can see here in the plans how the walls and the buildings are used to create these spaces, entrances, what have you. And we'll have, at least, I think, my first thing is that we must move in such a direction. In the case of Oxford, of course, that whole attitude, the whole paradigm has moved into the design of the whole city. The whole city has got to do with this yin-yang, positive, negative, and people love being there. It's really a very hostile climate, but you never feel that. This is MIT, where they took it to an extreme that, this I think is an extreme. Boston is much colder. And they made the whole building, the whole campus is actually one continuous building, so that every department can reach any other one without going outdoors. And then the outdoors is used really in the, as recreation space, etc. And this is an extreme. I don't think you have to put everybody indoors. But the idea of protecting the students, protecting the faculty from the elements is the essence and interaction and the synergy, as VC just mentioned, which comes from students seeing each other under pleasant conditions. This is a campus. I just thought I'd show you other ways these things can be organized. This is the Free University in Berlin. And in this case, they have the same kind of grid we're talking about, like MIT, but it's very intelligently done. Along the edge are all the departments. The center is all common rooms. That means the different departments can book these rooms. Different sized classrooms, exhibition areas, discussion areas, seminar rooms. And if it's a room used very often by a lot of people, it tends to be in the center. If it's a room used by a few people for long periods of time, they put it at the edge. So that you get this, and then if people from different departments start talking to each other much more because they meet in the corridor, the tea shops, etc. This was something very popular in the middle of the 20th century, and I think you have to examine whether this makes sense to you for any new facilities. You can perhaps share them. This is a free university now built, and you can see that again, the whole thing is a communication of the departments, student to student, faculty to student, etc. It's not about buildings, it's much more than that. Here's a great university done by Thomas Jefferson, where he puts the departments on the sides, and here is the center is the library, which he thought symbolized the center of all knowledge, and all the different heads of whatever, English or history, mathematics are on the side. And at that end, Jefferson kept a forest, because he said knowledge is open-ended and we should never build across there. And of course, about 50 years later, the trustees built a building across there. So that's a shame. Yeah, here was his plan. There's the rotunda, the library. And here it was very carefully laid out. It's very sort of 18th century that you get the different subjects. Then you get a garden of mathematics, a garden of geology, etc. And then the residences and the teaching areas. So there's a great deal of symbolism also in it all. So campuses are about ideas, because education is about ideas. And then, of course, talking about the climate, look at the way, this is the rotunda we were looking at. Look at the way the whole thing is tied together by a continuous arcade, and the state like Virginia is warm, but it's nowhere near as hot as Goa. And still he takes the trouble to make sure that even in hostile weather or rain, people can get moving. These arcades almost look like Goa. This is Harvard, which doesn't have complete squares, but the buildings are arranged so that they form the beginning, they suggest a square. And for all practical purposes, Harvard Yard has this wonderful sense of, how to say, protection. Now you see what this is doing. It's creating a zone. This is Harvard Yard where the students, it's really student area, and some faculty cross now and again. MIT has no equivalent because it's got corridors. When the students have a zone which is their territory, a lot of architecture, a lot of planning is about creating territories for people, so they have this confidence, this is theirs. So all the buildings which are quite innocuous, I don't think any one of them would knock you out. Together they form a system which is a knockout, because it's doing all the things which you want it to do. So architecture is not just a question of prima donna buildings, for God's sake. It's a question like in an orchestra, how do they all combine to make some sort of music? And then, of course, the students can take over. This is what I would like to see on your campus. Students actually walking together, talking to each other pleasantly. This is the Berkeley in California. You can see how naturally it becomes a big open plaza somewhere. And that's when they have tea shops on the edge. We have students going across. So we have to find a zone for students, which to my mind would be like a river of students. And that's quite different from ways cars come to enter the buildings. You can't mix them up. When the cars get precedence over the students have to scurry by, and the faculty too, along the sides. And it's no longer a pedestrian, but I say it again, a campus is a pedestrian city. Right now you've got 1,500 students at the building.
Yeah, 1,500 to about 2,000.
Yes. So that's and on this huge barren land, it's difficult to spot them. Now and again you see one or two students trying to cross somewhere. That shouldn't be the case. It should be there, well, even if there are only 1,500 of them, they should be in a space big enough for 1,500 people, well protected from this hot sunlight, with nice little places they can have a cup of tea or they can go in and study, whatever. There are many things. I imagine that, I do have some ideas, but I imagine a kind of pedestrian road which goes down through this, which is very animated and it has all the buildings that feed the students into it, but the cars and all are on the other side. They should not be on that pedestrian road at all. One of the mistakes here is that there's no distinction. The real thing is designed for cars to swoosh around at 100 miles an hour, whatever they're doing, and you know how they go around those circles. It's surrealistic. I'm sorry, I don't want to be personal, but really, it's very tough knowing which is your circle to get out. They shouldn't be near here. They should be on the edges. What should be going up and down the center are people, the students, the faculty. Faculty can meet students and the scientists meet each other. That's what a university is about. So you need a certain amount of growth for that. If you did manage to attract other colleges here, undergraduates, including music, I think music would be a natural for Goa. And you could have a great music school here. Both the Indian classical music and Western classical music and pop music too. It depends on who's teaching, etc. You'll get quite a different campus. So your first step is to move towards life, towards animation, towards really a student body, right? Then the second thing would be to try and build these facilities in such a way that they don't damage the old ones, the existing ones. I don't believe in knocking down those buildings. I mean, I think if they're falling by themselves, that's great. But you wait for them to deteriorate before you replace them. You're not going to go around because you've invested a lot of effort in them. Now, I think you have to work out a way that these two systems can coexist and reinforce each other. So obviously, this pedestrian path I'm talking about would at one point connect to this new building of yours, this big science block. It's got 1,000 people in it, you said, or something like that, 500?
We have a large area, 18,000 square meters.
Well, there must be close to 1,000 people.
There are 4 departments.
Yeah. So anyway, that will have to be part of the new system. The system has to use that building and approach it as pedestrians and approach it as cars and not mix the two up. So also your library, though, I mean, whether you recycle it as I don't know whether libraries are used today. I have no idea, I'm not in education. But it should be used, it's a brand new building. So either you use it as a library or you recycle it or something else. Got to do with the education. So things like that. I would think that we would have to step up the amount of use of the place. About the buildings you already have, I suppose if you had enough new things to add, you could try and make sense out of them in terms of what I was calling yin-yang, that the open space is as important as the built space. I mean, don't ever forget that you build those things in order to create that courtyard. It's exactly the other way around. Both are equally important. But if you look at any of the pictures I showed you, I don't know if you noticed any particular building. That's the success of those campuses. They don't draw attention. They have got beautiful buildings, but the buildings have to play a role in a much bigger music. They're not just silly little one-offs, you know. So that would have to change. Now it depends very much. To do that, I would think you'd have to attract the kind of energy and the kind of investment. I suppose starting with RCM would have to feel he wants to be things that this should be important for Goa to have a really great university. Actually, frankly, this has nothing to do with this, but from my point of view, I think Goa's future lies as a great education center. Goa should be like, you know, when people ask, I'm sending my child to college, they would ask, are you sending them to Goa? You know, the way we Americans ask, are they going to Boston? That should be our aim. And the second thing is, I feel if we're going to have tourism, we should have something intelligent like medical tourism. Goa's got the hotels, all it needs is to step up its hospitals. And we'd have a completely another kind of Goa. Now, in that Goa, a great university would be very, very important to give me identity. It's much more than just getting an IIT. I wish we had done that, or an A great university is a great university. Bombay was very much propelled by Bombay University, Madras University, Calcutta. You're not going to get any place if you don't pay enough attention to education, especially to university. Now, that will get you the funding you need, both from the government and I presume from some sort of private-public partnerships. Right, very often these schools are funded by people who have the money and they say, okay, you can have a business school, I'll pay for it. But it's part of the university. So that's way out of my experience, but you would know whether you need to do this and whether it's worth doing. But that will give you again the kind of building blocks you need in order to create something.
So one possible reason why most of our buildings are scattered could be that, well, we wanted to protect our land because there was no common boundary which was. Now in that direction, the road which runs in the middle perhaps acts as one more hindrance. Now, as a first step, given that the Vice Chancellor has mentioned to us that a letter has already gone to the CM stating that the road should stop at the point where it has reached and maybe aligned with the proposed LKS, could we bank on your support as well in trying to convince?
I don't know what it's worth, but certainly if we get a chance, I'll tell him. But I would think the CM would be very sympathetic to that. It's much more a question of the nuts and bolts of getting it done right away so that you don't get into the breach of contract stuff. You know, that absolutely.
Because that would be the first step towards protecting the existing campus.
Absolutely. And then the second step is, you can't use buildings in order to protect land because then you throw them all over the place. But you can find other uses for those buildings. If this became a more dynamic university, I would imagine you'd have many uses for those buildings. There are many things which happen which require to be isolated, certain testing labs, etc. I don't know why I'm being asked these questions. It's you who should be answering them. Would you like to give your take on the chances of the CM doing this?
Thank you very much for your thoughts on this, and I sincerely hope this is just the beginning of thinking about our campus. And I certainly hope that your wish as to what Goa University should be would be in the future. Thank you.
One thing. I'm sorry, I should just explain one thing. The foundation we have is not an architect's or an engineer's office. All we do is take an idea and incubate it to the point it can be handed over to professional officers to carry out. So all we would be doing, I'm sorry, we should have mentioned this earlier. So we're not here pitching for some work. We charge only our costs at the most, or we try and get it. But the main thing is to take an idea and incubate it to the point that it can be either rejected or approved. Otherwise, the thing in India is that there are lots of problems, but there are lots of bright people with a lot of solutions. They never get listened to because the people who can say yes or no never hear them. What we're trying to do is take a good idea, even other ideas. There's some people working on the pedestrianization at the center of Panjim. There's some garbage collection somewhere else. The thing is that you develop them, you incubate them, you create the drawings and the numbers, the number crunching, which says as a prima facie case now this is what like we did about the road. So then they can take a decision. So we will try and bring you to that point at which you can then make a decision of what buildings you go ahead with and not. Okay, thanks.